Greetings all. I recently attended a conference on armored vehicle design, and I thought there were enough interesting things talked about to make a little informational video. They were nice enough to release the slides to remind me of some of the things talked about, so I'll be chucking a few of them up. I guess the conference itself is supposed to be something of a brainstorming, idea familiarization and networking session between military and industry. Now, I attended the same conference a year ago and didn't ever get the slides for it, but there were a couple of themes. One, a technical design issue talking a lot about creating a standardized internal networking structure for the vehicles, which would allow easier integration of various different components from various different manufacturers. It's the difference between an appended upgrade and an integrated upgrade. Now, the most obvious practical example of this is the Crow's system in the M1A2 tank, which is basically an add-on as opposed to an integrated solution. So though the Crow's visual output was able to be piped into the extant monitors in front of the TC, the controls were a different problem. And you may think that the simple solution is just to put a toggle switch somewhere on the commander's control handle so that the handle either controls the Crows or acts as the commander's override, but apparently it's not that easy. As a result, there are two control handles taking up space in the position, which is not ideal. Especially not if you accidentally grab the wrong one in a hurry. In effect, as it is right now, much though it's easy to say, just stick a laser warning receiver, or add an active protection system, or even just put another radio antenna on, it's actually far more difficult to do this sort of thing than you might think, and is thus more expensive, time-consuming, weight-consuming, and, well, generally inefficient. In other words, if things were all that easy, they probably would have done it already. In any case, industry are now generally on board with the idea of common standards. It actually does have a name, the standard, but I'm too lazy to look it up right now. The other main theme last year was on what is being called the virtual crewman. It was touched upon a bit again this year, but the bottom line is that they're trying to take as many tasks as possible off the crewman and have a machine do it. Indeed, it is possible that in the future, the jobs in a tank would simply be crewman and commander instead of the current driver, gunner, loader, commander split. Yes, both the Army and industry believe that two-man tanks are possible, with all the advantages of size and weight and manning which come with it. Now, you may or may not have caught at the very tail end of my interview with himself and General Norman, General Dean, basically the guy in charge of developing future vehicles for the Army, stated this.
What is the best military science fiction I should be reading to understand the future of combat vehicles? And the answer is David Drake figured it out before the rest of us. So we are all just trying to do what David Drake laid out in Hammer Slammers.
Now, I disagree with him partly. The AI in the Slammers tanks, Booster, is very good. But what the real world developers are talking about right now is an AI even better than Booster. In any case, the roles currently distinguished by positions in current tanks will be automated, and the crewman would be instead, well, for lack of a better term, managing the vehicle. Anyway, the theme for this year was, we don't fight with things, we fight with formations. Or in other words, stop focusing so much on what any individual piece of equipment can do and instead see how it fits holistically with every other piece of equipment. If it doesn't synergize, and I'm not a fan of buzzwords, but it's really the best word I can think of in this context, with the rest of the formation, then is it something which is worthwhile? As a result, requirements and testing have to be conducted with that caveat in mind. It's not actually a particularly new idea. I have mentioned many times in the past how the M4 Medium was designed from the start to operate as part of the orchestra of the US Army as a whole, but the concept here goes down to a somewhat lower level. So one of the earlier presentations came from Army Futures Command, and this slide shows more or less how the fleet is categorized. Now, there are actually three categories: legacy, enduring, and modernizing. Now, the legacy systems are on their way out. The main legacy system is the M113 base vehicle, particularly the M1064 and 1068, which we just don't want to be seen to be put out to pasture. The enduring fleet is the stuff currently in service and expected to remain in service for many years to come. The replacements have not yet been identified, but upgrades are still coming, such as, let's say, the M88A3 or improvements to the Striker AT in the middle there. The AMP-V has entered full-rate production in the 1st Brigade. It's been completely fielded in Fort Stewart. They've also got the M109A7s. On the right-hand side of the slide, the new stuff on the way are the M10 combat vehicle, the minimally manned fighting vehicle, which has been renamed a little bit from the optionally manned as a reflection of what is actually feasible in the short term, the IRCA, or Extended Range Cannon Artillery, and robotic combat vehicles. There was also a commentary made about how the Army is evaluating different criteria, such as the balance that has to be struck between the different types of mobility. So, for example, how much you want to emphasize strategic mobility, which, let's say for ships, is a volume concern, versus tactical mobility, which is a weight concern more than a volume concern. General Dynamics put forward a presentation on reducing bottlenecks and aiding crewman decisions. Now, it's pretty common sense if you think about it, but I also suspect a lot easier said than done. And it's talks like these which give you a sense of just how difficult it is to create a modern combat vehicle. The old iron triangle is not the be-all and end-all, and though it's impossible for internet pundits to debate the efficiencies of electronic internals when they're arguing this tank is better than that tank, because we simply don't know them, it, combined with the whole fight formations not things concept, means that to a large extent the internal capabilities are as important, if not more so, than the gun size, horsepower ratings, and so on. Now, that's not to say that those latter things aren't still important, but they're no longer the sole providence of concern of a working tank. Maintenance, operational mobility, and so on are also concerns, obviously. And I'm going to come back to that with the Germans. In any case, combat is getting faster. As a result, anything which slows down the time between first detection of an enemy and rounds impacted needs to be identified and removed. Now, it doesn't matter how fast any individual part of the chain may be, if there is a single delay anywhere in the chain or if there are too many steps in the chain. So, some examples. We're expecting AI now to do things like target analysis. In order to identify a target, normally you want a better resolution of the image, right? I mean, it makes sense. Now, if you're curious, I think the subject in this slide is one of these UAVs. However, here's the problem. If you're running cameras and monitors at 4K, for example, that's a lot more data that you're sending down the data bus to the processing computer than you are at 1080p. And it's a lot more pixels that the AI needs to analyze. And if you decide, for whatever reason, that you want the image to be sent to another location, either for more powerful analysis or integration with other sensor information or whatever, that's more data that you have to send on whatever bandwidth system you're using. And bandwidth is already becoming a concern on certain transmission systems. Oh, and by the way, we're also really trying to reduce our electromagnetic signature, which shouts, "Hey, there's something here," to everybody who can detect broadcast wattage. So are you trying to leave more processing power on the sensing platform? Are you going to try to figure out how to create a reliable communications network which doesn't broadcast your position? Maybe use burst transmissions, laser comms? Can the system perhaps scan at lower resolution, and when it picks up an item of interest, either because it's moving relative to the background or it triggers some criterion, then the computer just sharpens that area? There are probably no end of answers, but you can see the problem. How do you streamline the whole system of, I found something, through, I know what it is, to, this is the best way of dealing with it? Here's another example of how they can speed things up. So right now, crewmen on the line receive information, not intelligence, as shown. The human crewman is going to get his information from various sources. So for example, a tank company commander has a platoon leader come on the net and tell him he sees a platoon of tanks at a certain grid. Then on the battle command system, a second platoon sends up a spot report of a tank platoon at a grid close to the first one. He has his gunner swing to the location, looks through the GPSE, and sure enough, he spies the enemy. Is that the same single platoon being reported twice? Or is it an indicator that you're actually facing a company-sized position? By looking at the map, the terrain through the gunner's sight, and making a bit of a judgment call, the company commander can then come to his conclusion. So let's say he concludes it's a single platoon. Only after that is done can he then start to think about what to do about the situation he's faced with and that one platoon. But what if the system took the analysis part out of the equation? What if the CO was presented with intelligence instead of information? In other words, the computers will integrate the various information coming from the reporting sensors, perform their own analysis, and then tell the company commander immediately that he's facing a platoon. The commander can then immediately conduct his tactical decision-making process. It saves time not having to assess the inputs in order to determine what the situation is in the first place. He only needs to decide what to do about the situation. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on the Security Force Assistance Command Brief other than to say that the role of SVABs has changed dramatically. Now, originally the things were basically training units. You send a set of instructors and advisors to go out and teach locals how to do their basic tactical tasks. You may have encountered them in Afghanistan, for example. Nowadays, the SVABs are far broader. Yeah, they'll still teach soldiers basic tactics if requested, but now they're ranging the gamut from doctrinal analysis through how do I get in front of somebody in the ordnance branch who can help us create a maintenance support structure for all these M1s we're buying? From there to, okay, we're in the middle of World War III. We need Americans as liaisons. It's a relatively new role for them, and it's still being worked out. So, for example, I asked them how they mesh with the various state partnership programs, and apparently they haven't yet figured out any hard handover lines for responsibility. The CG of the Maneuver Center of Excellence gave a presentation. He unfortunately didn't say where the Army's center of mediocrity is. I mean, I would have thought excellence was implied in everything anybody tried to do, no matter where they were, but I digress. I thought this was an informative slide. I also don't think that this is particularly news to anyone who has been paying attention. But anyway, here's another slide of his. I'll come back to Ukraine in a bit. As an aside, one of the Ukraine lessons learned by some speakers is that artillery is the big killer. But I personally didn't get the feeling that they considered the follow-on question of, is it a big killer because the two sides fighting in Ukraine are too static? Would it still be the big killer if maneuver were more a thing? There are also a couple more acronyms to learn. We are probably already familiar with the FLOT, forward line of troops, and the FEBA, the forward edge of the battle area. But now I think we can expect the FLOR and the FLOS, the forward line of robots and the forward line of sensors, to be added to doctrine. The US Army's Program Manager for Maneuver Combat Systems had a presentation, and as an example of just how complicated modern vehicle design is, I didn't understand a single slide. It's the roadmap, and you would expect the slide to be things like the new Bradley replacement will be the MMFV with a 5cm gun and a Javelin tow missile system or whatever, but no. It was all about the control systems. The things are either effectors or sensors. An effector is the 5cm gun, the smoke grenade launcher, the fire suppression, whatever. The sensors, well, that's obvious enough. The trick is to make them all talk with each other as a whole instead of the current subsystem silo type system we have right now, and make it easily upgradable. If that's done, then it doesn't matter so much which specific cannon is fitted or what the exact resolution is of the thermal imager or whatever. The Marines sent a presenter, and this is the ACV family they're buying. Now, of note, the ACV-30 is not the replacement to the LAV-25. For starters, I think it's just arguably too damn big for the role. The LAV-25 is going to be replaced by the ARV, a recon vehicle with all the goodies you might expect, like mass-mounted sight or UASs. The sheer size of modern APCs, especially the wheeled ones, is actually proving problematic to some nations which simply can't handle something the size of a Boxer, for example, just because the roads are too narrow or shipping space is critical or whatever. And apparently the Marines wouldn't mind something a bit smaller as well. Anyway, under current plans, the last of the Amtraks will be gone by late 2028 or mid-2029. And it's worth noting that the first program for replacing the Amtrak was started in 1973. Took a while. A fascinating update came from the Bundeswehr. And its next, I can't really call it a tank. It's the main combat ground system. Now, the presenter started with an affirmation that the Leopard 2A8 is not a major program of record for the German military. It is merely an immediately available stopgap to fill in for tanks sent to Ukraine. The long-term plan for the Leopard fleet is going to be something else. But next gen. For them also, the Iron Triangle is no longer the usual firepower, maneuverability, protection balance, and it's more than that. In fact, in their assessments, they came up with a list of 300 requirements for the Leopard replacement. There was, however, a slight snag. See, everybody has noticed how tanks seem to be getting heavier as more and more requirements or technologies are added. Both Leopard 2 and Abrams have added about 40% to their weight over 40 years, and the assumption is that whatever the next vehicle is going to be, it's going to suffer from similar bloating over the course of its life. Since militaries seem to have accepted 70 to 80 tons as viable for modern warfare, the post-bloat weight shouldn't exceed that. As a result, the new vehicle can't exceed 50 tons. Not 1 gram over 50 metric tons is the instruction. But the running gear and powertrain should be designed for the larger weight from the beginning in order to make upgrades easier. Thus, the Germans were faced with the question of how do you get 300 requirements into a 50-ton vehicle when current vehicles have fewer capabilities but weigh more? The answer? They can't. But they also can't drop any requirements. The only solution was a multi-platform concept. Yes, it's going to be expensive. One tank is going to have the capabilities of a Bolo, but be split into a platoon-sized element of multiple vehicles. Oh, and by the way, they're all going to share the same hull. Yeah, some of these capabilities probably don't require a 50-ton chassis, but there was a decision made that keeping maintenance and logistics simple was more important. Okay, easy, right? But again, you hit the manpower problem. They need, let's say, 4 vehicles to conduct the tactical tasks that only 4 people are doing right now in one vehicle. They can't have full crews. The only solution is automation, either minimal or 0 crews, with computer systems, and basically AI, filling in the gap. So by way of example, if it's blue, the computer will do it. If it's pink, that's the human's job. Now, most of these things, when programmed correctly, the computer is going to do faster. It will acquire faster, aim faster, shoot faster, and submit results to the cloud faster. The humans just figure out what to shoot and where to go. Now, it's worth noting in none of the slides have the Germans mentioned anything about hardware specifics. There are plenty of other slides that I haven't shown you, but they don't say the gun will stay a 120mm or we expect we're going to increase to a 130mm. They haven't decided yet. Not only have they not decided, they are open to all options to include decreasing caliber. If the next gun is accurate and precise enough, who knows, maybe the computer can aim for weak spots. Or perhaps you fire a first round with the kinetic energy to lock a track, and if it's moving, and then a quick follow-on shot into the side once the tank spins to a halt. Or perhaps you can have a cooperative engagement with one effector, be it a jammer, a gun, a laser, or whatever, to knock out a target's active protection system, while a second one fires a missile or non-line of sight round at it. You are presumably by now starting to understand the idea that the planned battlefield and vehicles of the future are a conceptual leap away from where we are now. Us old dinosaurs will have to adapt to relying on computers to do what we view currently as signs of skill and ability. Which, in fairness, are skills we probably should still retain in case communications go down, but I have a suspicion that hardening communications is also on the to-do list. As for just how far in the future is this going to be? After all, the Panther and Abrams X tanks of the future were just shown last year. They're currently in Phase 3 technology demonstrators. The tech demonstrator vehicles are probably going to be unassuming and unimpressive, even if they are revealed to the public, which I doubt they will be. Either way, it seems from their current trajectory that the replacement for Leopard 2 isn't going to be Panther or Leopard 3. It's going to be something far more evolved. Following the German colonel, a Ukrainian colonel stood up and gave a presentation. It started simply enough with slides like this, or this, There was a fair bit of the presentation taken up on the UAV war, the use of first-person view UAVs, the amount of various munitions being added to UAVs, and also of the opposition equipment. Now, I'm not quite sure the advantage of lots of little shaped charges around the outside instead of a big one facing forward, but I'm sure the Iranians had something in mind. Then a few surprising slides. The current air defense against Shahed Lancets. Yep, twin Maxims, or the cannon. Basically, the defense is to put as much lead up as you can. I think you may have seen a video one guy uses a 12 gauge against a Lancet as if he's clay pigeon shooting. But what if the enemy sends a drone in at night? Yep, what is old is new again. But the strange thing is, it works. The Ukrainians are claiming about 70% of Shahed 136s are shot down. Another interesting slide. I've mentioned this in the past. That the Russians are having to draw these vehicles out of storage is an indicator that things are not going well for them. However, that's not to say that pulling out these old tanks is not sensible or a value add. They are brutally reliable and simple to keep operating. The maneuver capabilities of modern tanks aren't really of use in the current trench war, and a 100 or 115mm HE round is still pretty nasty to infantry on the receiving end. Electronic warfare is obviously a big thing. Now, I didn't understand most of the slides this guy put up on the subject, but I did understand this one. It shows the level of GPS jamming encountered. It turns out that most of the antennae on the donated vehicles, such as Leopard 2A5, are jammable. However, there are anti-jam antennae which are getting retrofitted. There's a quick note on the battle management systems. Ukraine uses something called Delta, which seems to be similar in concept to CityWare or CPCE, a browser-based system which apparently they're using in conjunction with Discord for communications. But the Russian one was interesting. Now, the colonel didn't say that I can recall that this was a Russian-based system that the Ukrainians had adapted, or if it was just a purely Russian system, but it's an interesting use of commercial technology. Then there was another salvo with slides about neural networks and the use of AI. Now, I have no idea what YOLO 5 is, or the segment anything model from Meta AI, but the Ukrainians are obviously paying a lot of attention to it. In any case, it seems that the Ukrainians are as close to the bleeding edge of practical application as anyone, although in fairness, they are well motivated. Finally, there was a presentation on the future use of robots, which I missed. Anyway, I hope you found this view of the planned future of warfare enlightening. And to a large extent, it makes sense. We're at the technology point right now that if you can see something, you can kill it. Yes, there is still plenty of advancement in the making sure you can see it and kill it department. New munitions, fuses, weapons, etc. are still being developed to be more lethal than the current generation. But we've gone beyond, if you can see it, you can kill it. Now it's see it faster, make tactical decisions faster, kill faster. What will set the future military vehicles apart isn't obvious in a photograph or a sales brochure. And that future is definitely in our lifetimes, and maybe even within my career. I've got a couple of years before retirement yet. Right, take care. I'll talk to you on the next one.